Hello and welcome back to the College Football UK podcast. I am your host Fletch, and just like I was last week, and I will stick to my guns on this one, I am joined by two absolute stunners with Sam and Gary. How are you both, gentlemen?
Tired, very, very tired from the draft. So
Feeling it.
from
Definitely
yeah,
feeling it. Yeah.
yeah, I don't see me getting through day two.
No. Well, if you can't tell by that response and by the fact that most people by now should hopefully, I think, know our schedule. We're quite vocal about it. It's Friday, the lovely spot right in between day one and day two of the draft. We've had an amazing night. So before we I guess we get properly started, did you at least enjoy day one of the draft? Because I think I spent most of it with you, Sam, on a Twitter space, and we had a lot of fun watching all that unfold.
Yeah, I mean, I really enjoyed it. It was the first draft. I mean, obviously, people know that from if they watch the Hurdle the Line podcast, they'll know that I'm a Rams fan. So this was my being able to listen and actually see my team pick for the very first time since I've started following them. So yeah, it was. I was waiting in eager anticipation until the 19th pick. Um, but obviously we'll come on to that in a bit
Yeah.
in terms of the draft. But yeah, I enjoyed it very much so.
It was
What about you,
enjoyable. There
Gary?
was certainly some, I think, obviously some surprising picks and some interesting things that shook the things up. I'm surprised there wasn't as many trades as I was expecting. I know there were a few, but it kind of ran pretty smoothly to kind of a lot of the mocks. Most of the players went in and around where they were expected to go. There weren't any sort of major jumps, major sort of reaches until you got right to the very end of the draft. Pretty much, I feel, even though I stayed up until 4:18 a.m. waiting for the Niners to pick, and then was feeling particularly underwhelmed by the Niners pick because it felt like a bit of a reach. Or from all accounts,
Yeah.
I've done a bit of reading about him. He does seem a gadgety, Edelman-esque type player, and he'll fit in the slot, and he'll be gadgety, and he'll help with the returns and stuff. But
Well,
for a first
we'll
rounder,
get
it was a bit like, oh,
Well, we'll discuss the draft a little bit in a minute, but I want to start this episode off, and there is a bit of method to this madness here, so you will need to bear with me for 1 second, because like I said, there is method to this. Got a question for you. Now, I personally believe that getting our brains flowing, a little question like this, get our brains flowing, get those creative juices going, is the best way for us to start. So I've got a little question for you both. Can you tell me which school has produced the most Heisman Trophy winners?
I'm going to go with. I don't think it's right, but I'm going to go with Alabama.
It's a great guess.
it's gonna be one.
If you listen on audio only, Gary right now just looks very puzzled and is
Like puzzled.
in deep
I'm
thought.
running through my head, going, "It's not there. It can't be them." USC have had a few, but not many. And Clemson, Stanford. It's gonna be, yeah, it's gonna be Alabama, Georgia. It won't be Michigan. I can't see any Michigans. I will go Georgia, just out of sheer weight of. No, I don't even
Well,
think it is.
I'll give you
Ugh.
all one hint. I'll tell you one college it's not.
Alabama.
I'll say it's not
It's not Michigan.
BYU. It's not
It's not BYU.
BYU.
That's. I'm not
Uh,
that surprised by that. I think they've had one, haven't they?
no. So I think
Actually,
we've
did
had
have Jim
an
McMahon,
Alabama,
wasn't
we've had Georgia thrown out there.
Anyway, sorry, yeah, Jim McMahon was a BYU Heisman winner.
I'm just trying to think of some of the players in the past that have
I'm
gone.
trying to. USC springs to mind, but obviously with Caleb recently, but I don't think they've had that many. They've had a couple. FSU have had 3, I think.
Mm-hmm.
ACC, the ACC haven't had that many. Clemson, I think Trevor Lawrence was a Heisman. Joe, LSU.
Would you both like a clue? This is going to give it away quite big, quite massively. But would you both like a very big clue?
Well, we obviously neither of us have got it, so I think we probably do need a clue.
So your clue is that changed earlier this week. The answer changed earlier this week. officially.
So it is now USC.
USC have produced 8 Heisman winners. It was officially a joint 7 with Notre Dame, Ohio State, and Oklahoma.
Ooh.
I was
with 7
about
You
to say
see
Oklahoma.
Ohio State.
I was close to saying Oklahoma because they had they've had a lot of more recent ones.
So last week when we were talking about the Heisman Trophy, and I had a lot of it up. Last week, the most wins by a school was joint 4 places, with Notre Dame with 7, Ohio State with 7, Oklahoma with 7, and USC with a 7 with an asterisk. And that number is now 8. And I know we said this a lot last week, but we'll get into that a bit later as to why. First,
it's just going to be a running theme from every.
This is going to be a running theme,
isn't it? Yeah. The college football. We'll get onto that later podcast.
And why is that a running thing? I'll find out next week. So we'll quickly run through the draft. Now I know you kind of started mentioning there, Gary, but I'm going to throw it straight to you. To start off with, Ricky Pearsall for the San Francisco 49ers out of Florida, wide receiver. What do you think of that pick?
It's obviously a pick that the team liked. I think it's probably, in retrospect and in hindsight and having a look at it now, not the worst pick, because he was probably scheduled to go somewhere like 40, 41, 42-ish. So the fact he's gone 10 bits early, not massively, because obviously we're not drafting again at the moment until 63. So he probably wouldn't be there. And if he was the highest on the guy's boards, then go and get him when you've got the pick. It was just, I think, because of what happened in the draft and the other pieces that were still available that I wasn't expecting to still be available on the board, to go and get, in effect, a second round wide receiver in the first seemed a reach. Seemed they could have used that pick to maybe pivot a little bit to one of those defensive stars that, say stars, but they were certainly being mocked up as a star. Sort of, Kool-Aid was right there. Why not just take a punt on that and get your, then you can. We've got loads of picks later on. We can batch them up and come up on the second. Why did we? It felt like this guy was on their list and they were going to get him if he was there, and they didn't really see or look at what was still available and what they could have got. I mean, I get it. It's a 5th year. That's the only plus I can look at it. It's a wide receiver. 5 years, because it's the first round in the draft. You get him for 5, and it's cheaper, and it's a long, from a long-term perspective and a business perspective, it makes sense. But I wasn't that excited about it. It was like, who, what? He was, if the receiver that was mocked and what everyone thought maybe would take there was McConkey, and he was still on the board. Why did we not take Lad McConkey? But the guys obviously know something that we don't.
Yeah. Now, you'd think that this next question would be directed at you, because a young man from FSU was taken in the first round. But what I'm going to do is throw this one to Sam, because that's where he ended up going, to the LA Rams. Jared Verse, how do you feel about the Jared Verse pick?
I mean, I said I've already said this in sort of chats when other people have asked me. He wasn't my first choice. He was actually my 3rd choice pick. I did really want to bring in Latu. I did want us to then potentially go and get Byron Murphy, which is obviously, being a Texas boy, wasn't particularly happy he went to the Seahawks. But Jared Verse has a lot of, I don't know, he looks a really dangerous edge rusher. When you watch his tape and when you sort of see the way that he impacts the game, he looks
bully.
Yeah,
he's a big, rough and tumble bully.
And I just think that, we need one of them. We lost Aaron Donald. We need someone who is basically just going to pancake people and get to that quarterback and sack him. And I think he had, was it 19 sacks during college or something like that? So, it's good numbers.
Yeah.
But,
19 odd stacks at a decent level as well. This is probably, as we talked about last week, that college level and the differences. You can get players coming out of the Midwest divisions racking up sacks. But then you look at
Yeah.
which linemen they're going against. You know, Jared Verse has been going up against some decent tackles and decent guards, and has been just
I think
brutal.
I think also just the fact we got him with the 19th pick, like, people were drafting him potentially back end of the 10th, 11th, 12th picks, around that sort of area. So, for him to fall, I mean, to be fair, when we watched the draft, all the edge rushers just seemed to fall a bit. But for
Every
him
defensive player fell, didn't it? Let's be honest.
but for him to be available at 19, the fact we didn't have to trade up for him, I know we were obviously linked with trading up for Brock Bowers and then he got taken. To not have to trade up for essentially one of the most vital pieces of our defense that we needed, it's a really good feel factor that we can get someone of his quality in at that point. And I know that it's made that a little bit sweeter by the fact that he's an FSU guy.
Yeah, Sam, and as we said just off air, Sam and I had a brief discussion about it at whatever time it was, 3 a.m, and my response was he's going to cause the NFC West a lot of problems. I was hoping he would slide to the Niners because, as I say, he just bullies that outside edge, and it's a great pick. And unfortunately, as you mentioned there, it's also a good pick that the Seahawks did. That was they needed to plug that middle of their line, and they've got a really good one there as well. So from an NFC West perspective, from a Niners perspective, it was a horrible draft night.
Yeah.
Because the Cardinals did really well with their picks, obviously, and then we just mentioned Jared Verse going to the Rams, the Seahawks plugging their defensive line. It's made the NFC West more interesting, that's for sure.
Yeah. And just from my perspective as a Lions fan, I'm very, very happy. Like I went to sleep thinking, okay, I really like this guy, and woke up thinking, oh my days, I love this man. I absolutely love this man.
And he again, to say he enamored himself and made sure that the fans loved him. What a way to make an entrance! I mean, first of all, looking super sharp, and then taking the microphone. I don't know if you were watching it on NFL Network. He's already got his first interception in the NFL, which is literally just stealing the microphone off and just talk to the crowd. I just thought was just brilliant. How to make sure a Detroit, fan base falls in love with you instantly. That's it. That's how you do it.
And I mean, we
come out
talked
with pure swagger, pure confidence.
Oh, absolutely.
We talked about on the hurdle line, didn't we, about the fact cornerbacks. Well, no, I don't think it was on the line. I think it was on our Twitter space about how the best corners have egos and they have that chip on the shoulder, and you can tell straight away he has it, but not in a negative way. And
it's not in a flashy over the top way.
Yeah,
it's
he's
not in
very
a
much
way. It's more.
No, he is. He's seeing him when he came out and he talked. He's a Dan Campbell pick. 100% a Dan Campbell pick. You can just see it in him.
I mean, look, you look at who we're going to go up against this season in the NFC North. We've got Caleb Williams just coming in, and he's just had Rome Odunze thrown to him. But we've also got DJ Moore. We've got Cole Kmet. We've got Keenan Allen. There is a lot of strength in that Chicago Bears offense. You look at the Vikings and the fact that they've just added JJ McCarthy, who whatever questions you want to throw his way, he has an arm and he can be very accurate with that arm when he wants to be. And you give him a Justin Jefferson, that could be dangerous.
Don't forget Addison.
And even the Packers, Jordan Love is a fantastic quarterback, and giving me like a Christian Watson, then they still haven't taken a wide receiver in the first round. We all thought we were going to do it just to spite Aaron Rodgers, and they didn't. But you give him those up. We need to, because it's a very, very powerful offenses in the NFC North. And I think he's going to go up against Justin Jefferson, and he's going to be thinking, do you know what? I can take Justin Jefferson. It's fine. I've got him. And he's not. You do run the risk sometimes of, especially once a corner gets beat once, you can run the risk of a corner kind of then getting taken advantage of all game because the receiver's in your head. I think this guy's going to be a complete and utter. You've done me once. Well done. It's me. I'll let you have that one. Yeah. And now you're in a false sense of security because I've got you all game now. It's fine. I know what you're going to
do. He reminds me a bit of Jalen Ramsey in that sense, where you could go all game. I mean, we saw it when it was him versus DK every single year, where DK every now and then would get his number, and and then all of a sudden Jalen Ramsey would get in his head, and then you see DK do his usual 15-yard roughing the
15-yard roughing, penalty, whatever. Yeah,
yeah.
sportsmanlike conduct. Yeah, it looks like a lockdown corner. Let's
Yeah.
be honest. That's it. It
Yeah.
looks like that half of the field you guys don't have to worry about.
And the thing is,
that's what you want from the first rounder.
It was the Lions' worst position for the last 2 years under Dan Campbell. You were terrible in the secondary for the 2 years running. So to get him in is a big coup, really.
We thought we were going to have had it kind of locked up a little bit in getting CJGJ in last year, and he went down against the Seahawks, and that was his season done. And I said to you guys as well, the Lions can do one of two things, and I wouldn't complain, purely because we were okay. The secondary had its moments of being okay, but then the line would be terrible. And then if the line was really good, the secondary was terrible.
It's complementary football.
You need to address one of them, and because the way the Lions played football last year was when the line was struggling, we sent linebackers down, and we sent a couple more men down on that line, and it was okay. We were generating quite a bit more pressure, but then we were thin in the back, and Cam Sutton was our cornerback one, and that's a bad place to be. Cam Sutton is your CB1. That is a bad place to be. But while we're on the topic of the draft, one thing that we've kind of mentioned already is we've got some winners and losers, but what we're not going to do, we're not going to necessarily talk about individual teams in the NFL as winners and losers. But one thing that was quite apparent is that I think it's the first time in in modern draft history
since 1970 or whatever,
that no defensive player was taken within like the first 10, 12 picks.
I think the first defensive player was taken at 15.
15 in the Colts with Latu. So
How dare they?
For anyone wondering right now who's been watching the first draft or maybe watching it looking to come out of college, what can you guys, I think from your perspective, look at is to why do you think so many defensive players fell? Is it just a couple of picks got made after that top five that just shook things up a little bit? We're not necessarily mentioning any team specific. Falcons. That just kind of threw things a little bit out of kilt? Or is there anything particularly with, I guess, this year's draft class or this year's on defense or offense where the offense was just very top heavy? The defense was just not quite there. Is there anything you can look at, I guess, going into this draft that from your perspective would explain why defense fell so far?
There's a couple of things that I can look at. So first of all, you look at it that the NFL's gone more offense. I know it's an old adage that, defenses win championships and stuff, but the NFL is an all offense kind of league now. So, offensive weapons and offensive players are higher in need, or higher in want. I think it was also added, I think the level of defensive players coming out this year at those positions that we talked about, Sam, the edge rushers, which are usually premium, and defensive tackles, there's not been like the elite. The ones that were coming out were, the good ones. There were some good ones, but they weren't the elite kind of boasters of a couple of years ago, or an Aaron Donald. There was no, absolute game changer wreckers type thing.
Yeah, they were the sort that you'd probably see picked in the second round. Those sort of that would be behind the likes of Will Anderson and Thibodeau and those sorts of players that were seen as the elite. I mean, even Aiden Hutchinson, those sorts of players, I think, were a step above everyone else.
Yeah. So I just think that the top level this year wasn't there. It didn't have that sort of game wrecking, change the game mentality, and I think the NFL, the teams that were drafting, had needs on the offensive side as well. I think it's just that. That's what it is. The teams didn't. They've already got this. They stocked on defense in the last few years when it was a defensive draft because there were better defenders and there were better defensive players coming through. This year, it was inevitable that some teams were looking around going, we need QBs, we need wide receivers, we need weapons, and therefore that was where most of the high picks went on offensive weapons because that's what they needed. And I think they've stocked the back end of their defense, so they're okay. It's like, well, we need to go and get a top class receiver Plus the fact, on the flip side, it was a good offensive class. The receiver
Yeah.
class this year was good. So it's a weird kind of everything kind of came together
Yeah.
to make it an offensive draft.
I think for me, the biggest thing this year, and I've not seen this in the sort of the tight, short space I've been watching football, so many offensive linemen being taken in the first round. I think because
Yeah.
that class, the offensive line class, is very deep, but I think there's also numerous teams that were looking at the offensive line thinking we need to improve here. We've got one or two that are good, and the rest is just. I mean,
Rest
you
are
look
just
at the
piecemeal
teams that we
bodies and
had.
stuff.
Yeah, people. I mean, I think we probably. I don't know if there's an official stat for this and whether it is right or not. Someone who's listening can either confirm or debunk what I'm about to say here. But it felt this year that there was more quarterbacks out for a long period of time. You obviously had Herbert was injured for quite a long time. Tua got injured a fair bit. We had
Joe Burrow
Joe
was out.
Burrow was out.
Kirk
Um,
Cousins went down.
Kirk
I mean,
Cousins
it
went
was the
down.
year. It was
Aaron
the year. It
Rodgers.
wasn't. Yeah,
Aaron Rodgers.
Rodgers, of course, 4 seconds in or whatever it was. It was the year of the backup QB, wasn't it? It was.
Yeah,
It seemed like, yeah, and obviously some GMs and people would be like, "Hey, this guy's our franchise. This guy's the face of our. We need this guy standing upright, selling jerseys. They have to go and
I do.
put some big lumps in front of them."
yeah.
On that, so I think the Browns took up probably about 2/3 of all injured quarterbacks this year as well. They seem to
Yeah,
just
Yeah.
they
they seem to go
just
through the
run through them
quarterbacks
all,
like
don't
they were
they?
nothing.
Yeah,
Was it five they
Um,
ended up having in the end?
five
Yeah.
Five
starters,
starting.
didn't they?
I'm sure Ollie, if he's listening to this, will also be able to tell us what percentage they took up of the cap as well. Because I know he's mentioned that was like 26% of the cap this year was on IR.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's always very interesting to look at because again, if you're I hate using the term casual, especially for people over this side of the pond because it's so hard to keep up with. That not keeping the most tabs on the draft doesn't make you a casual, but it's for those who don't necessarily pay as much attention to the draft. Every draft you'll look at the board and think, "Whoa, what's gone on since last year?" And I said this again on I think it was like last week on Hurdle the Line. I said this on the space during round one. Last year, I think threw a lot of people off in terms of how we feel the draft is going because I think last year's class was quite weak.
There wasn't any massive stars that came out of that. Nothing.
No,
I mean, Bryce Young, CJ, Will
Was it Will?
Anderson.
It was it? I was going to say, was it Will Anderson was the first pick?
No, he was third.
Bryce Young,
Bryce Young,
Oh,
CJ
of course,
Stroud,
yeah.
CJ
Bryce Young,
Stroud,
CJ Stroud,
Will
and
Anderson.
Will
then
Anderson.
the Texans went back for Will Anderson. But nominally, Will Anderson was the best player of that draft. The same as this year. Marvin Harrison Jr. was the most polished, ready to go, best player of the draft. But obviously, they don't go first because QB needy teams go and get their QBs first.
I think as well, one of the big things about the draft, and like you say, don't want to call them casual fans, but maybe people who aren't particularly, as well-rounded in following the whole NFL, most of them are going to be looking at quarterbacks, wide receivers, skill positions, because they're the ones that attract you into the game. They're the ones that make the big fancy plays.
They're the ones that
so
score
to
the
speak.
points on the fantasy points.
They're the ones that score the points. And I think that you tend to forget, unless you get like your Aaron Donalds, your big Nick Bosa's, those sorts of players who are just game changers. TJ Watt, for example, and those sorts of players. You don't look at the defensive side unless you start really getting into it. So I think it's one of those things where I don't want to say that the draft is all so down to sellability, but I do think at times it can play a part because realistically, there's a lot. I mean, that's just a side thought in terms of the fact that Caleb Williams goes at the first pick because I mean, yes, he is arguably a generational talent. He's going to be franchise quarterback for years to come, but he's going to sell shirts. He's going to he's
Well,
the
did you see the
superstar X
news?
factor.
Apparently, because he has already broken all merchandising sales records in his jersey is like the biggest selling jersey in the world
So
and
since Caitlin Clark
the
2 weeks ago.
you want to say since Caitlin Clark about a week ago, yeah.
Yeah.
So those sorts of things. I don't say they necessarily. It's the first thing that's on the mind of GMs and head coaches, because they do want just players that will fit into their schemes and such and such.
Yeah.
But I do think it can play a part in the picks that they make at times when they don't necessarily have a player that they're completely sold on. Who's going to attract a lot of money?
Who's going to put
wide
bums on
receiver.
seats? Who's going to put bums on seats, or who's going to sell shirts? Yeah, that's going to
One
be
of the
certainly the GM side, probably more than the head coach.
Yeah. One other thing I think people need to realise, just really quick again, is free agency will dictate a lot of the draft as well. Depending on how deep free agency is, if a lot of running backs end up on the market,
which they
then
did.
running backs will not be a priority in the draft. If you look at, I know again coming from a Lions fan's perspective, it wasn't maybe the best in terms of DBs, but quite a few DBs went into free agency this year. Quite a few okay ones as well. So that side of things as well will always affect how you draft, because at the end of the day, these things are. It's how you can best. It's all about how you can best bolster your team to put the best product on the field, and if you can do some of that with ready to go, ready-made players who've been in the NFL for 3 years, why are you not going to do that if you can get them at a decent price? And just before we move on past the draft, I'm gonna kind of list off here just some of the schools that have come out of the first round. So obviously the first overall pick went to USC. Came out of USC, but LSU produced 3. University of North Carolina also produced 1. OSU produced 1. Alabama produced 3, and that's all. That's a very common case of Alabama. A few of them going in the first round, particularly on the defensive side of the ball, but on both. Washington produced 3.
just make football players. It's just what just what it does.
Although
that might change with Nick Saban not being at the helm.
I would say that's going to be a fun one to watch for the next couple of drafts as well. Is how the Alabama change and their value. But Washington produced 3. Michigan produced 1. Penn State produced 1. Oregon produced 1. Georgia had 2. Oregon State had 1. UCLA had 1. Sam, your Texas Longhorns had 2 players go in the first round. Gary, your Florida State had 1. And we've already spoke about where they went as well. Arizona had 1, Duke had 1, Mississippi had 1, Oklahoma had 1, Clemson and USC, University of South Carolina also had 1 each. But one little thing that I think is really nice to mention is the little university that is called Toledo, who have not had a first-round draft pick. I think the Toledo Rockets, aren't they, or something?
Toledo Rockets, yeah.
Have not had a first-round pick from their school in over 30 years. And I'm pretty sure, Sam, you can remember not remember who it was, but...
It was in 1993, which ironically is the year I was born, so I don't actually remember it happening. But it was Dan Williams, a defensive end, who went to the Denver Broncos. That was the last time, and he went at pick 11. So we've gone from 11 to 22. So the next pick they're going to get is going to be 30. It can't be 33 because it's not in the first.
Expansion this is an expansion. 30 years.
30 years time, he'll have the 33rd pick of the first round will go to Toledo. So yeah, that's the last time that Toledo had a first round pick. They've had a few seconds, they've had a few thirds, but yeah, last time they had a first round.
That is lovely, and we spoke a lot. Well, we spoke last week about schools that get good money from previous people who went to the school, and the visibility they get. For a team like Toledo, it's huge to have. For a school like Toledo, it's huge to have a player go in the first round. And something that's incredibly exciting and can only, I guess, really be I can't think of
Toledo
the
are an
right
FCS,
equivalent.
aren't they? They're not even an FBS, are they? They're an FCS school.
They're an FBS school, Division 1 FBS. They're in the Mid-American Conference.
Mid-American. Okay. Yeah.
And that is, for them, it's incredibly exciting. And they are, if I could pick one winner for a school out of the first round, it's going to be the Toledo Rockets, because that's amazing for them.
Yeah.
And hopefully it gives them a bit of exposure. Hopefully a few more donations come through from previous alumni, which would be lovely for them.
Hopefully a few players think, well, I go play at Toledo. I got a shot. You get a shot.
Exactly. And as we wrap up the draft talk, now last week, if you listen to episode 1, you will realise that we left you with more cliffhangers than a soap opera. We spent half of that episode saying, and we'll come on to that later. Well, this is a segment that we like to call later. This is later. We are at later. So, what I think we're
only
going to
last
talk
week's
about
later
here,
though, because we've already got laters from this week, right?
So, we're going to speak a little bit here about the future of college football. We spoke last week about the previous history of college football and arrived to a point where nobody knows what's going on in college football anymore. There are some things that we do know about what's going on in college football, and these are the things we will talk about. And as we go forward, it is up to everybody to make their best guess as to what 10 years is going to look like.
Yeah, this is correct at time of going to print right now. It's one of those time in moment things, because who knows next year and the year after what it's going to look like.
So we spoke about the divisions, the conferences that are within the FBS, and we spoke about the Power 5. The Power 5 being the Big 10, the SEC, the Pac-12, the Big 12, and the ACC. That is looking more and more like going from a Power 5 to a Power 2. The Big 10 and SEC are swallowing up a lot of the bigger teams and bigger schools from those conferences, and leads us into some major news from this week. The Pac-12, who we mentioned a couple of times, have lost what is called their autonomous status. Now, I don't know if any of you gentlemen, who can probably word this better than I can, would like to are able to explain what it means to have an autonomous status and why this traditional Power 5 are also considered the autonomous 5.
Yeah, I'll have a go at it if you don't mind. So the Power 5 conferences, as we just mentioned, throughout NCAA and throughout college football, have tended to always be at the top of the pile. It's always, shall we say, the cream of the crop. But in the way that college football has always been structured, is that every college gets a vote, every college has a say, no matter where they sit, if you like, on the totem pole, on the pecking order. Now, normally this has been fine, and all the colleges play nicely together, and it's all for the good of the game, the good of the sport, etc. However, that started to change when, and this is coming on to that later thing that we're going to come on to later, money started to flow around the NCAA and student athletes. And by being the cream of the crop, the bigger sort of TV revenue, the teams that were better, and therefore people were watching, and therefore people were giving money to, these Power 5 conferences started to make, shall we say, decisions that some of the smaller colleges couldn't really keep up with. I think one of the things that the major thing was kind of like, for the benefit of a UK audience, a cost of living type of stipend was given to some student athletes, shall we say. So all of the big 5 guys sort of went, look guys, we appreciate you're playing for us. You don't get money, you don't get paid for all this. We make a absolute fortune off of your bodies and your athleticism. So we will pay your rent, or we'll give you like a monthly, an annual stipend to go and buy some burgers. It wasn't a lot. It was, I think we talked about it at the beginning, Flair. I think it was like $2,000 or something. So, in a grand scheme of things, okay, granted, this was back in the 80s, so it was a lot more then than it is now, but it's not like a massively huge amount. But obviously, all 153 colleges had to vote on that, and some of the, the majority of them turned around and went, well, you can't afford that. We don't bring in the kind of money that you do. and this caused a bit of a rankle and caused a bit of an argument between the NCAA and the big Power 5 conferences, and it became apparent and it became obvious that these 5 conferences weren't the same. They were part of the NCAA, but they were a little bit different, and they needed a little bit more leeway. So they were given what's called an autonomous status, which means that they are allowed to make decisions for the good of football, should we call it, but for the good of the Power 5 mostly, without having to have everything ratified by the full NCAA, every single voting member. So the Power 5 were able to do some slight changes to make, and to be honest, they made a number of changes that were good for the Power 5, and some of the other divisions didn't benefit as much. But then that's, as we just mentioned, part and parcel of that sort of ladder structure, hierarchical structure. So that's what the autonomous state was given to those Power 5 conferences. And the reason this has become apparent and in the news this week, as you just mentioned, Fletch, is that with the disintegration of the Pac-12, let me make sure we get this right. So 4 of the Pac-12 teams have gone to the Big Ten. 4 have been swallowed up, moved, realigned, whatever you want to call it, to the SEC. And 2 have gone to the Big 12, sorry. There we go. I knew I'd get it wrong. And 2 have gone to the ACC, which, if you do your maths, that leaves 2 left in the Pac-12, Oregon State, Washington State. They, by their very nature of the Pac-12 just not really existing anymore, the other Big 5, Big 4 have kind of come together and gone, you guys can't really have that special dispensation anymore because you don't have the leeway, you don't have the arm, you don't have the money, you don't have that sort of leverage. It's just huge in terms of what's happened, because having that autonomous state allowed those teams to vote amongst themselves to make themselves better. And obviously now these 2 teams that are stuck in what is still called the Pac-12, and for legal reasons, I think those 2 teams have to play under the banner of the Pac-12 at least for this season. Otherwise, they lose $270 million, I think is the figure that's bandied around. So they've been given a payoff by those 10 teams leaving to say, here you go, sorry, good luck. As long as you keep the Pac-12 banner on your shirts and play under it, you get $270 million. But if you leave that and you go into another conference and you go play somewhere else, we'll take all that money back. So it's a weird dichotomy that's going on in the Pac-12 right now, or what was the Pac-12. But that's why the autonomous state is important, because now it's even less teams that have that voting right and that special privilege. So, as I say, the Big 5 made decisions that were beneficial to the Big 5 and the wider football audience. Now it's only the Big 4, and we kind of call them the powerful Big 4. What are we going to call them? Is it going to be called still the 4 going forward? Who knows? A smaller group making decisions for an even smaller group. The worry is it could start to have a 2-tiered system within an already 3-tiered, 6-tiered system. Who knows what's going to happen?
I suppose for those who are sort of, I suppose, obviously based in the UK, and those who are maybe more familiar with our football, it's probably very similar to like saying the likes of Manchester United, Arsenal, Man City, what the class as the traditional Big 6 have this like essentially a veto to be able to make any decision they want that's for the good of the Premier League. And it's like basically saying like, okay, Tottenham, you're no longer part of the Big 6. You've lost that ability to veto. That's exactly how it is.
Well, one thing that's been mentioned and again, if you talking to people here about the particular ones who are into our football. Now, these are 2 words that might kind of make shivers go down your spine, but we're going to say the 2 words anyway. Super League. The term Super League has been thrown around, and it means something actually surprisingly very similar. But if you actually think of the way US sports work, it's a lot less scary when you talk about it in US sports than it is over here, given the culture of what it is. And I do actually think that this has some relatively similar I guess, effects if you look at certain ways certain things work. So when you actually think of the way our tier system works in the league, it's the Premier League technically operates as a separate company and completely separate. They fall within the FA's banner, and they fall within the structure of the league system, but the Premier League is a separate business. The Premier League operates in many ways on its own and can make some of those specific deals with Sky Sports, with beIN Sports, with Optus Sports, with NBC, with C, all those things that benefit the Premier League and the 20 clubs that play within. Now, the one good part of that is the relegation system. Other teams can join in and be part of that, and it's based on merit. But when you look at when you get certain owners come in, yes, you can both stop looking at me like that right now. I get that my team is one of these, but when you get certain owners come in and certain things, or when you start to build up a certain amount of wealth, you get your own pocket within that, and then you start to think not only are you worthy of all this extra money, but you now think that you've been put into this Power Five. But actually now, at this point, you're a bit tired because you're a bit tired of letting Preston North End tell you what to do. You can't let Preston North End stop you from going getting that TV deal with Sky like they did in the 90s. But now what Manchester City, Arsenal, Chelsea, United and Liverpool are all doing, it would be the equivalent of saying, well, do you know what? We're not even going to let Brighton tell us what to do anymore. Aston Villa, we're not letting you tell us what to do anymore. So they went and joined. So and then you've got the Super League where it's okay. No, we're going to go make our own decisions again in this own separate thing where we can make even more money and do our own thing. Maybe we'll bring a couple people with us, but like you say, at one point they turn around and say, "Well, actually, do you know what, Tottenham? You've not won anything in a while. Go away.
Yep.
You don't get to be part of this anymore. You haven't got the structure or the standing within." And I think it's very difficult to find an exact comparison, but there are little bits here and there that I think we've come across over the last few years within our football that may happen. But yeah, it's for me. There's within the NCAA. There's there's thousands of schools within the NCAA, and it all started basically with your Michigans, Ohio States, any Big Ten, SECs, and whatnot, turning around and saying, "Well, I don't want the our vote is worth more than a community college
somewhere
in the middle of Colorado,
Arizona, or whatever."
Yeah,
and that sums it up. So it kind of, in the realm of US sports, it also does make sense because they don't do relegation, they don't do promotion stuff, so it's kind of fixed who's in and who's out. So that drama isn't in their sport, which is one of the things that we do much better, and I think they could benefit from if they could somehow work it out. But money's too much of an object over there. So yeah, within the realms of US sports, this makes more sense, and it does make sense. And as you say, that tiny community college that plays low-level football in the middle of Colorado and whatever else, they shouldn't really have the same sort of say as the Ohio State or Michigan or Georgia, who bring in millions of TV revenue and whatever else. So it kind of makes sense. But yeah, as I say, the only worry is that it's now a smaller group making the same level of decisions for a smaller group again, and it worrying some could lead to just if the fall becoming two, and then
I mean, when you look at it, I guess in terms of our football, could you imagine this was the equivalent? I guess if you actually imagine all of this as within the Premier League and Football League system, all of these conferences, and you talk about the Super League and your Manchester Cities of the world, like your Premier League teams of the world, your higher Premier League teams of the world, we're saying, look, we're not interested in what you've got to do anymore, and we get an equal say as Carlisle United, and we don't want it. That's not fair. We bring in all the money. We do this, and at that point, that's when they threaten to say, well, what they did 10 years ago now nearly was say, well, do you know what? If you're not going to let us do this, we're going to leave the NCAA. We will no longer. And do you know what's going to happen when you lose all of our money? Yeah. You're going to fold. And that's a big problem for you. So they threaten to leave, create their own collegiate football, collegiate athletic kind of thing. And then the NCAA just said, no, please do not leave. Here's autonomy for some of those decisions. And the reason I'm bringing this up is kind of the equivalent of when I say to the Premier League of, if when the Super League happened over here, or whether the initial talk of the Super League happened over here, could you imagine what the backlash would have been if the Premier League said, right, please don't go to the Super League,
but have your own
here,
within little bit of
go
something.
and do this. There are certain decisions that you can make. Certain rules no longer apply to you. The financial fair play no longer applies to you guys. You can do certain things with your finances that no other team can do. These are certain privileges that you can now get that other teams can't, despite being in the same system. What would that uproar look like over here?
It would have completely broken, as you mentioned, the football pyramid, which is the whole structure of, the top, and it filters all the way down. It would have just broken the whole structure.
I think,
it just wouldn't have
for
worked.
that, it's without going sort of, I suppose, into our football too much. It's that's why I suppose the fans were a great part of preventing that from happening, and the big clubs, particularly the fans from the big clubs, turning out and rejecting the Super League and causing that massive problem with all the owners. So I think that's the difference is as well. It's the acceptability within the fan base of whether that would then be allowed to happen. And I think in college, seeing, if you because they don't, like you say, they don't have that element of relegation, they don't have that, the same sort of structure that we do. If you turn around and say, okay, well, Michigan, Alabama, Ohio, Georgia, whatever, are all going to be in one single league. They're going to play each other every single year, and it's going to be like 90,000 people playing 90,000 people turning up every single year. We're going to have balls left, right, and centre. They'll like that because they want to see the best teams beating and playing against each other. And it's, that's just how it is. And that's, if the money's there and the money's going to attract them, especially to the owners and for the bettering of education. Again, another topic we'll come on to in a bit around the bettering of education within the American sport. It becomes a much bigger attraction because of the financial element that it can have and the impact it can have beyond football.
Yeah. Definitely. And that's one of the things that I've not delved into yet about the disintegration of the Pac-12 is we're talking college football here, but as we briefly touched on last week, college football pays for an awful lot of NCAA scholarships and sports and whatever else. And now the Pac-12 in effect doesn't exist. What does that do for men's basketball, women's basketball, softball, lacrosse, hockey, all of the other sports that, basketball being maybe the one exception? All the other sports run at a massive loss for most of these colleges and whatever else. They use the football money to kind of cover all this lot. So how does that affect? And I know there's slightly different conferences and the strengths in basketball are different. There's conference interests are a lot stronger in basketball, which are not equivalent to the college football conferences. But surely a whole conference, Pac-12, disappearing from football, it's going to have a massive effect on all of the other sports in the US.
Especially for those two teams that are left with no other division.
Yeah.
Like that's just, and they already had lower end.
Yeah, the lowest. I think we looked at last week. 0.83 billion or something, wasn't it? Or
they were on the lower end of that spectrum in terms of the money coming in. So, you already have not a lot of money coming in, and now you basically don't have anything because
you're not
your division, your conference no longer exists.
Well, one thing I found interesting, and actually something I learned whilst, I guess, preparing for a lot of this podcast over the last month or so, was when looking through some of the divisions, as I was looking to scrape some information online for a slightly different reason, that is some of these teams as well already don't technically belong to the conference that they play in. There are a couple of colleges that say, let's just say, for example, you look at the, I think I was looking at the Mountain West Conference or something ages ago. and it'd be like, well, here are the teams in the Mountain West, but when it comes to men's lacrosse, these two schools also play within the Mountain West Conference. But actually, when you look at the SEC, not necessarily the SEC, but some of the smaller, the American Conference, our Conference USA, which, as we mentioned last week, is just a very good name for a conference. Still, it says on the tin. Is they'll be saying, right, men's gymnastics or women's gymnastics, they will there compete in Conference USA, but they are actually usually a part of such and such a conference. And your theory then is what they've got to then do is go and ask and you'd probably be looking at, maybe you could bundle some of the athletics programs together, and you say, well, actually, if we do gymnastics, but actually it would also make sense to do lacrosse, it would also make sense to do archery, something, softball, baseball, something like, can we put these three sports in your division, but they're not accepting new teams for football, so we need to take them over to some other conference for football. And you're going to end up with a lot of colleges now, that a quarter of their athletic department is in one conference, 20% is in another conference. Couple of the other little sports are over in that conference. A couple of them are homeless for a couple of years. The football bit's independent, which then just creates a mess for the whole college.
Just a logistical nightmare, isn't it? And then you say these are, as we just said, Sam, these are probably the colleges that are not doing so well revenue stream wise. And then you're taking that smaller revenue and splitting it into 6 different streams, and then by moving different conferences, as you say there, Fletch. And we talked about it last week. The conferences are kind of geographical. So now you've got potentially got like Oregon State, for example, way up there in the Pacific Northwest, having to potentially travel to Montana and somewhere in the Midwest or Michigan or something to do gymnastics and lacrosse and whatever else, because that's the only place they can squeeze in. All that money, that small amount of money that they were bringing in, is going to get spent and gone on all this other stuff. It's crazy. It's a mad thing. But yeah, as I say, it's not something I've delved into, but it's just going to have like a trickle down effect that it's not really been.
Yeah. And this is where I guess some of it comes from. I know there's a reason why we say nobody quite knows how college is going to look in 5 years' time. And that may not 100% be the case with football. There are certain things that we know will happen in football. There are certain things we know won't go. But as far as certain conference realignments go, you look at your Washington State and Oregon State, we don't know where they're going to be next year, because there's no way they can afford to stay and play a Pac-12 conference with just 2 teams. They're going to have to go and start asking conferences, please, can we come and play with you guys? Because we need somewhere to call home. Do they
as long as they can play under the and again, as just going back to what I mentioned, they're going to have to ask if they can go and join a conference, but also then rename that conference the Pac-12 so that they can keep their money. It's going to be. So I think you and I both listened to the Locked On College Sports podcast, and they were talking about it the other day, where they might join, I think, the Mountain West, or ask the Mountain West to merge and keep the Pac-12 label so that money doesn't get lost, and then maybe that money gets shared around with some of the Mountain West teams to keep that keep it alive and keep it a Pac-12 West. Who knows what it'll end up being called, but it's a way. It's going to definitely
a Pac West.
Pac West, yeah, a Mountain 12.
But
a mountain pack.
Mountain Dew, why not? The Mountain Dew conference.
Yeah.
No, there's a Mountain Dew Bowl. There'll be a Mountain Dew Bowl, definitely. There has to be.
But I think this is the thing, though, and it's very, very up in the air, and there are certain conferences that might, there is a lot of things going on, and I would 100% suggest, by the way, while we're on it, we have not been paid to do this. Me and Gary are just doing this out of the kindness of our own hearts because we enjoy it. Do listen to the Locked On College podcast, because Spencer, who hosts it, I've always found that even when I don't know exactly what he's talking about, the language used is pretty easy to follow, and I can always get on top of something. But it's not a difficult podcast to follow along with.
Short and sharp as well.
Great on the spot on college. So 100%, I would always recommend giving Locked On College Football after you listen to this one, obviously.
Obviously, this will
'cause
be your first port of call, but Locked On
Yeah.
College Sportscast, 25 minutes every day, just gives you the highlights, gives you a thing for that day,
Yeah.
and it does. It's just great. It's just easy to digest, and as you say, Spencer,
Yeah.
the main host, just somehow gets it and is able to break it down.
Yeah.
And you can understand it.
Within that, and I think we're already talking about money, so I'm going to skip the bit that I officially have as the next bit, and we're going to go straight on to money and NIL deals. Now, if you've heard of NIL deals before but not sure what NIL means, it means name, image, and likeness. This is a very new thing to be added to college, and this is why we started with the question. So believe it or not, we're actually going to do a that's for later, and I'm going to cover it now in this episode. This is
Yay!
great work. So the NIL is very specifically important this week, and the reason why I asked that question at the start regarding the Heisman schools and why there was an asterisk on USC was many of you may know the name Reggie Bush. Reggie Bush won the Heisman Trophy in 2005, but it was not rescinded from him. He willingly gave up his Heisman Trophy due to certain issues going on
At the
around
time,
the legitimacy at the time of his. With certain changes in the NCAA as of late, the issues that were going through at the time are no longer relevant or are no longer an issue in today's NCAA. So this week, the Heisman Trophy Committee reinstated Reggie Bush's 2005 Heisman Trophy. This is why USC had an asterisk next to their 7.
and
he's
more
now an 8.
importantly, I believe all of his stats have been reinstated as well. Because one of
Right.
the things that happened as part of his giving up or handing in his trophy was that he was expunged from NCAA records. And I believe he has been reinstated on that front as well. So all of that 2005 absolutely stunning college football season. If you want to watch one season highlights of one player and to understand just what a Heisman Trophy player is, go and watch Reggie Bush 2005. Electric. That's all. Just electric.
Yeah. One of, if not the best player to come out of college. One of the best college performances you will ever see. And the reasons in which his Heisman Trophy were given up were everyone knew it at the time as unfair.
Everyone was doing it.
Nobody now it's okay. We doubly know it was not fair, and it's been about time with numerous people campaigning for a long time to get his Heisman reinstated. It is about bloody time that the NCAA did. The Heisman Trophy Committee did it.
It is long overdue.
Long overdue, and
Long
that has
overdue.
been across the board from NFL players, ex-college players, college coaches, across the board. It's been finally. That has been what everyone has said. That's been the overriding emotion. Has just been it's about time. You've done the right thing. Well done. It should have happened a while back. And the reason it should have happened a while back, is as the NCAA or the Heisman Trophy Trust statement said, due to sea changes in the NCAA environment. And we may as well, let's delve into what that exactly means. Reggie Bush was under investigation and was found to have had irregular payments to his parents from the college and via some, shady things. So basically, they were effectively paying his rent or effectively paying him to be an athlete and and as I say, this was done at a time where everybody was doing it. It was done across the NCAA. Everyone knew all the big teams were doing it. Yes, it was grey area and it shouldn't have happened, and it was all done. It wasn't actually to Reggie. It was possibly via his parents or whatever else. But it was all happening at the time. But for some reason, they chose Reggie because he was the face. He was the best player. He was the Heisman Trophy winner. It made an impact. Obviously, NIL became Was it 2 years ago, 3 years ago when they changed it as part of the lawsuit? I think it was 2 years ago. Maybe we can check that when that actually happened. But basically, the student body of the NCAA, the student athletes kind of all got together and kind of went, hey guys, you're kind of taking advantage of us a little bit here. We put our bodies on the line for 4 years. Yes, we do college as well when we get an education, but you make billions of dollars out of us and we are not allowed to make any money whatsoever. That's a bit unfair. It's kind of like a bit cartelish, and it's a bit wrong. And they took it to the courts, and the players union as effect won that right of, hey, you guys should actually be able to utilize your, as we called it, the names, image, and likenesses to financial gain. You can't get paid by the. Sorry, go on.
As you say, it was June 2021 that NIL was first introduced.
There we go. So it's only been 3
years. It was August 23 that they started the case to reinstate him.
So as I say, 3 years. Sea change basically means that your now college QB can be sponsored. This is a better way of looking at it from a UK perspective. You're sponsored by the local car dealership, and you're also, the big tech firm in the city sponsors your players, and that's kind of where NIL. It's not a payment from the universities, because the universities are still raking in millions, still taking all the money from the TV deals, etc. But now some of the players, and granted, pretty much all of the players are getting some form of NIL bonus and some form of payment one way or the other. Some getting more than others, but all players are now able to trade upon their name and their image and their licenses, and they go out and do endorsements, they go out and do adverts, and they go do the bits and pieces. I drive a Toyota, you should drive a Toyota too. I'm the quarterback from UNC. UNC drives this, or UNC wears Nike. That kind of stuff that everyone does. But now they're getting paid for it, finally. Yeah. And I was
going to say, it is worth noting that when we say they get paid, it's anywhere from between 1,000 to 15,000. 1 to 10,000.
Yeah,
in terms of the amount, it's not huge amounts of money. Yeah, it's
small little bit. So you can have multiple NIL deals. So over time, I think interestingly enough, it was stated that certain QB this year, if they were able to stay in college one more year, would potentially make $3 million, which is more than the rookie contract. But in the NFL, so that's how much it has changed from not before. So that's why now long-term conferences, long-term college players are going to be looking at actually making more money.
Sorry, go on, Sam.
I was just going to say, using probably, I think, one of the biggest ones that I suppose that, and again, this is probably one that we're going to talk about in a lot more as the years go. Well, I mean, obviously, in sort of this year, and probably not this year, but maybe from next year onwards, is Arch Manning, who obviously known from the Manning family, Peyton and Eli,
generation, football royalty,
Archie, and all of that. There's a belief that he's valued at $2.1 million in terms of his NIL because of his affiliation with his family. And also you've got the likes of...
Did you know what's really... I love I don't know, just going on Arch Manning, he's possibly one of the highest profile players to not sign up for the new college football game.
Yeah, for the new college football.
He won't be... Well, he will be, but he won't be in there by name.
It won't be the... Yeah, and also you have, again, just sort of as another example of how this... the NIL has sort of had has an impact in terms of, as we were mentioning before, Fletch, from last week, around the whole element of superstar names and stuff like that, and the superstars. Bronny James, so LeBron James's son, played his first college basketball game, and it's believed that he is actually worth, in terms of NIL valuation, $7.5 million. So you're going to have cases where legacy names are going to be coming through, and that's where they're obviously going to be earning the millions. And I suppose that's where, the benefits are in terms of NIL for the big names, but also, yes, okay, you're going to have the big names earning millions, but it's worth keeping a mention on that. Actually think about some of these players that maybe won't get into the NFL or will have to go and look for college, like look for football in maybe like the XFL or the CFL or
Yeah.
elsewhere. They're going to be able to make money whilst at university now, or at
Yeah.
college now, and that's, yes, fair enough. It might only be £5,000, but you've got to think some of the people coming into these colleges on scholarships have nothing or have come in with very little. So even to
Yeah.
be able to earn some money using their own name, their own image, and their own licenses,
Well,
and that
Yeah, it's huge.
one
just
thing that
makes it better.
there's been cases before, though, not just with Reggie Bush for earning a little bit of money, but there have even been other circumstances of players who've received just a bit of help from. And one of the issues has always been with, you cannot incentivize a player to play for a college. They have to be there on the basis of the college and the football. There can be no other incentive to keep or have a player because they can't be being seen to be getting goods or even services or goods in return for their playing at the college due to many other rules. And one classic example is, and I don't want to butcher his name, so I've just got his name up here, is Ray Ray McElrathbey.
He didn't want to butcher his name, but he did it anyway.
Yeah, McElrathbey. But I don't want to, but
Hey-ho.
who was the subject of the movie Safety in 2020 that came out on Disney Plus, which was a true story based on the fact that when he was in college, his 11-year-old brother lived with him. And while he was in college, he was really, really struggling. His little brother lived in a dorm room with him, wasn't allowed, but he had no other way. His brother would have been homeless or being put into the system. He would look after him. He was his sole guardian. And when certain members of the college had noticed and flagged it up, members of the community helped. I think it was the head coach's wife helped by giving him food, by making sure he was fed, by making sure certain things were done for him so he didn't need to worry about his younger brother. And the community came back, and he got in a lot of trouble with the NCAA because it was deemed that he was essentially taking payments, even if it wasn't cash. That was a payment
Goods and
for him
services in
paying
kind, wasn't it?
and another I guess it's not the exact same thing, but the concept is relatively similar if you've ever watched the movie Blindside, where the way they looked after him, and then when he went to college and the college that he chose was considered to be a way of paying him to get him to a certain college and coerce him into playing for a certain college because he was such a good athlete. There was a lot of trouble there. So it's not just simply, sorry, I know I'm monologuing a little bit here, and I don't want to completely monologue, but the NCAA has had a seriously, very overly strict policy on what a player can and cannot get whilst playing football for a college. The NIL deal is the tip of the iceberg where they can get paid and it's great, but there are some other players who haven't even been able to get a meal when they couldn't afford it and had certain rights and had legal issues with the NCAA because of food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the measures are draconian, to say the least, about what can and can't happen. And as you
The
say,
thing
Stan,
is,
some of these scholarships come out of the poorest areas where they come to a big college and whatever else, and they have nothing. They don't have books. They don't have somewhere to live, etc., etc. They're walking around, they're seeing all these other guys who have come from money or whatever else, and they're having to live in that area. And yes, if they get help from, as you say, Fletch, they get a free meal at the diner, or some people help to do laundry and whatever else. The NCAA can turn around and go, "That's a service you're getting," and that basically means that you're being paid to play for this. Absolutely insane. So it's no wonder they took them to court. No wonder it's changing.
I think as well you've got to think about yes, okay, you are going to get the big names are going to be earning billions and off of this, and yeah, there are going to be instances where you're going to have a few that earn a lot of money, but for the majority of them, this is a lifeline during what is arguably
Yes.
to them their only shot of success or getting out. You hear.
And
I
we
know
said
that
last
this
week
isn't.
how small that opportunity is for these
Yeah,
guys.
and it's I don't want to sort of again you try not to stereotype, but again with a lot of the players that come through and you hear the stories that they tell of being from deprived backgrounds and having to you know being able to go into the NFL and basically buy their parents' houses and be able to help their whole family live, and you just think actually some of this money that they'll be getting not only will help them achieve their dreams, but also support their families who are in really bad situations. And you don't, I think sometimes that gets lost because you do see the likes of your Arch Mannings, your Bronny James, who are going to be earning millions and are already set for life because of the family that they're in.
Yeah,
So it's I think that for the majority, the in the introduction of nil is a massive benefit to
it's a massive
individuals.
game changer. It's a massive game
It's just,
changer.
yeah. And I just think that, you have to sometimes, you have to have it and you just
Yes.
can't get away from it. And I think that's
I think the
the
issue
crux
is,
of
and I
it.
think the concern for the NCAA and the colleges and the athletic departments and all that sort of stuff is that the the fact that nil is now there and student athletes can get this money direct given to them or whatever means that the colleges are not going to get it. So the money's not going to go into the colleges because,
Yeah.
the local Toyota dealership, instead of giving the college 20, 30, 50 grand, as you say, Sam, they will give it to 10 grand to the running back, 10 grand to the QB, 10 grand to the two wide receivers, and maybe the tight end. So they'll all get a 10 grand nil, and they'll come out and they'll go, I drive a Brown's Toyota because, or whatever it's called, right?
Yeah,
And so that's going to change eventually. The NCAA and the colleges are going to, their revenue stream is going to change. And I
yeah,
think at the moment it's a bit of a land grab of the NCAA going, hang on, wait, this could eventually mean that we don't earn as much money and whatever else. So there's a bit of that going on. So I think this, as we said, 5 years time, who knows? Right now, it's just the tip of the iceberg now, where some
and
players are making big, some players are starting to see the benefits. Some agents are really, pushing the boundaries of this. Why
I
wouldn't you,
think
right?
as well it's also, and I suppose this leads us quite nicely into our final topic, is that
Mm-hmm.
It's
for
almost like we got a plan.
colleges,
It's almost like we
I
planned
know
it.
it almost sounds like we're really good at this and we know what we're doing. Um, but you've got to think as well that these aren't professionals. This isn't a professional sport.
It's
It's
4 years,
essentially
short period.
it's still technically meant to be amateur,
What
and it's education first, and that's the
what
bit that
Yeah, and
needs
they're
to.
not getting paid for playing football. They're getting paid for. They're essentially influencers at that point.
Yep.
Yeah,
They're as good as an influencer or just a personality when they're getting paid, because they're not getting, actually they're not getting paid on a basis of here's $5 million to be a quarterback or a wide receiver or a running back.
No, it's
They're
here's
getting
here's
paid
50
on a
grand to
sponsorship.
come and sponsor our car dealer, blah
Yeah,
blah blah
50
whatever.
grand to go and drink a can of Coke when you finish the game. Here's
Yep.
50 grand to when you're sat there. I don't know if how about things like that during the game. I know they can't do certain things during the game, but
This is
when
afterwards.
you walk
Make
out the
sure when you
practice
walk off,
and
you're wearing this hat and this
yeah,
coat.
when you leave or when you walk into the stadium, you're wearing the hat. You've got a bottle of Mountain Dew in your hand.
You're wearing
There are these things.
Beats headphones, for example.
Yeah,
It's not
like
that,
we
but that
see
kind of stuff.
every other, like these are things that are happening very consistently around the world. Most actors and actresses and other sports stars we know that, you know, NFL players have also got the rights to go and get these deals. Patrick Mahomes is in every bloody State Farm advert we've ever seen.
Hmm.
Not as He's not getting paid for that to be a football, he's getting paid to be in a State Farm ad. But as you move on to things like that, I think there was one thing that was meant to be mentioned about Marvin Harrison Jr.
Hmm.
to do with NILs.
Yes, and it's quite important because it's a great understanding for people now who don't understand college or maybe don't see college until they get to the draft. Marvin Harrison Jr. drafted number 4, best receiver in class this year, gone to the Cardinals. All Cardinals fans are out there at the moment going, great, let me get a Marvin Harrison Jr. jersey. You can't get one. You are unable to get an official Harrison Jr. Cardinals jersey. The reason you can't get it is that Marvin Harrison Jr. has yet to sign his NFLPA license agreement. So the NFLPA at the moment are not allowed to use his name, his image, his likeness to sell anything. So merchandise wise, he cannot go and buy a Harrison Jr. jersey. That's probably going to change. However, at the moment, and we just mentioned it at the beginning, Caleb Williams' jersey just sold however many million units. Cardinals can't do it, and that's what NIL is. That's the empower of it. He now is empowered to his name. He's got the understanding that his name is important, and yes, he's a legacy player as well, so he's kind of knows that his name is important already. But that's the kind of where they are.
I say NIL is not a college thing. NIL is not a football thing. NIL is a thing everywhere, all the time, in all sorts of places. And these are things that are not, like I say, they're not specific to college. But in certain circumstances, we don't think about them until these things. You cannot use his name, his image, or his likeness. That is why it's called NIL. And moving on into that, you go into a reason that some players get the chance to change their colleges. Quickly, we'll try and touch on the transfer portal, which is going a bit crazy at the moment because it is open right now.
Spring transfer
the transfer
portal
is a brand new thing for the NCAA and college football. What does that mean to go into the transfer portal, and why is it a thing right now and it's never been before?
I suppose the easiest way of looking at it, free agency for colleges, right? I think that if you're a football fan,
free agency for colleges.
It's essentially free agencies. It's a way for some college athletes to kind of go, I'm not going to get a shot here. I'm at a big school. I'm at Ohio State. I'm at Texas A&M. I'm at places where I'm third, fourth on the roster, and I'm probably not going to get playing time. But if I go in the portal, I might go to a slightly lower school and get playing time. So it's a bit of that. It's a bit of some of the teams, some of the bigger names who have had a good season, maybe 2 seasons, dipping the toe in the water of the NIL pool, because some colleges have a bigger NIL budget to share around, and this is where it gets tricky, because it's not the colleges sharing the NIL budget, and it's the crew, but some places, if you move to, you can get a bit of a bigger payday. So some college students are utilizing, some college coaches are utilizing the transfer portal to a great extent. Colorado Buffaloes being the prime example, who have literally changed their 22 by using the transfer portal. They've almost given up recruiting from the local Colorado high schools and have just gone, hey, transfer portal, everybody in.
And it's worth noting that actually before, obviously we talk about Caleb Williams with the big name at the moment, he was one of those stars who moved from Oklahoma to USC and started pretty much as soon as he got there. And this is, I suppose, some of the big changes that have happened with the transfer portal. Obviously, the spring transfer portal being one of them, but the fact that before 2021, if you were going into the portal and changing colleges, once you'd made that change, you were not able to play for a year. You had to sit out for a year. So from 2021, that was scrapped. They introduced it where you could change from school to school without having to sit for a year. And that's why I think we started seeing
change between seasons as such, couldn't you?
Yeah, and I think this is maybe potentially why we've seen more people going into the transfer portal, probably why we're seeing an increase in transfer portal openings as well. So, that
Yeah, because you
does
think
play a
about it, we
part.
talked about it before. Student athletes, college football and athletes, 4 years max. Was it freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, right? So 4 years. That's your window. You take one of those out by transferring, that's a big chance of, it's a quarter of your playing career potentially gone because you wanted to move schools. And at the time, moving schools wasn't an up and down, I'm going to move there to play. Most of the time, these transfers were because of family issues or whatever. Players didn't do it because of the detrimental effect. Sitting out for a year was basically a quarter of your college playing career. So you wouldn't do it. Now, being able to move between seasons because you don't have to take that year out has made it a lot more palatable and a lot more of a way of teams strengthening or weakening and whatever else.
And I think it's one thing as well to import, like, what does, I think you need to ask yourself, when it comes down to things like the transfer portal, what's important to a player? And why would something like the transfer portal be? And one thing I think is really important to come out of the NIL stuff is certain colleges offer better, can offer you better NIL deals, can generally go on to help you generate more money and more notoriety and more things like that. These are great. If you go to, I think we spoke again. Anyone who likes the NFL should know the name Deion Sanders. If you go to Colorado and play with Deion Sanders, your name, your social media goes up. Everything about you goes up. That is it. That is an exciting place to be. That's where people are looking because you've got Coach Prime. End of story. That's really helpful. That can get you NIL deals. There are stories of players turning up with a couple of thousand followers on Instagram, turning up at Colorado, and it's tens of thousands of followers overnight, essentially. This is a massive thing for players. But the reason I'm bringing up NIL in the transfer portal in this way is there are a lot of people out there who will have you believe that players are purely moving on the basis of NIL deals and purely moving on the basis of money. And that puts a certain reputation on college football players that right now is just unfair and untrue from what I find. In that college players, now they've got NIL deals, they're money hungry. And that's where they're going to go, and they're going to go follow the money. No, yes, a rookie NFL deal will make certain deals within NIL will make you more money than a certain rookie NFL contract. But the ultimate goal of all of this is to make the NFL. There are certain players who will be guaranteed to go into the NFL, and yes, they might like to have a little bit more money. But the best way you're going to make money as early as on in your career, get to the first round of the NFL, get as high as you can in the draft because you're going to be worth more. Then when you get into the NFL, you're going to have to perform at a high level to earn yourself a contract. College players still understand the benefits of the pure goal of this is to make it to the NFL, not to win the I made the most money in college race. Most players are moving on the basis, or almost all players are moving on the basis still of this is the best for my progression in my career where I can make it into the NFL. This is a school that's got, and we look at, again, I know we've said we've got to try and not rein it back to our football as much as possible, and I get that because we've got to have people who listen, one who don't listen, but for some of us, this will always be a bit of a part of call for us because it's the sport that we grew up with and knew. So I do apologise if you don't like our football, and that's not where you're coming up from it. But you have academy players. What's the best thing that's for them if they're at a big club? Is the best thing to go over and play more football at a smaller club, or is it to try and work your way through the academy and get yourself up into the starting 11? College players also have to deal with that, but that's what's going to get them into the NFL. Do they stay at an OSU, or do they stay at an Alabama? Maybe be wide receiver 4, where they're barely going to get a look in, they're barely going to get targets on a week-by-week basis, thus not really adding to their draft capital, but you'll have certain eyes on you when you do, or do you go to a, I don't know, do you go to a BYU or a or one of the slightly smaller schools that are in one of the bigger conferences where you can guarantee that you are wide receiver one there, you will be seeing all the targets and just about everything that goes to you. But you're not as big a school. And I think that's a really important thing to look at. Sorry, I know you're going to jump in there twice, Sam.
I think what's also very important, and this sort of links to the argument you were saying there, that it's not about the money, is that, and again, this is how we're talking about how the college football is constantly evolving. We had this from 2021 where they removed you had to sit out a year. Well, they've now introduced another change to it where, as of, I think it was Monday the 15th, that was when it was ratified by the NCAA DI board, or D1 board, sorry, board of directors, that if you are going to go into the transfer portal, the transfer rule that aligns with the transfer eligibility within the existing academic progress requirements, if you're a 4-year undergraduate transfer student athlete, must, one, leave their previous institution academically eligible, two, be in good standing with the previous institution, aka not have any outstanding disciplinaries, suspensions, dismissals, etc. And three, meet all progress toward degree requirements at the new institution prior to competing. So the point of this is that, yes, okay, you have the introduction and the increase of NIL and, the freedom with that, but there's still that underlying focus that actually this is about education. Yes, okay, people want to be focusing on getting into the NFL. This is about getting that once in a lifetime career. But at the end of the day, these are still students. These are still people who, if they don't make it into the NFL, they still have to have something to fall back on. They need to have that degree. It's the point of why they're there. So in order to be able to also have a bit of control over people not chasing money, they've introduced this as a backstop to say, well, yeah, it's fine if you want to go for the money, and you want to go for the sport, and that wants to be your career. That's great. You're still a student athlete. Your first priority is still making sure you get your degree when you leave college. And I think
that because it's important,
yeah.
because as you say, it makes sure that your GPAs, and it's an odd thing for us to understand, but GPA is important in the US. You've got to make sure that your grades are up. You've got to make sure you're putting the work in outside of the playing field to make sure that, as we said last week, tiny proportion of these college players and high school players actually make it to the NFL. So you've got to come out of college. So this opportunity that you get given as scholarships or whatever else, make the most of it. Get an education, get a degree out of it, get something that if you don't make it to the NFL, you can go and be a lawyer or an MBA, and you've got your business and you've got all that stuff. So get your GPAs, and don't cut and run. And I think we mentioned it, Sam. There's some transfer some transfer portals are like, oh, I'm in trouble with the coach, I'm in trouble in the local, whatever. I made a bit of a hoo-ha over here. I'm going to jump state and head off the other side of the country.
That state has different rules, so it's technically what I've done previously no longer is a problem. So realistically, they move for those reasons, and we have seen over the last few years quite a few players who have been suspended and then put onto the transfer portal straight away because of the issues that they have there. And I do think that, again, it's a good idea to have this backstop of, I think it's also going to encourage
it's an accountability, isn't it?
Yeah, if you mess up and we suspend you, that's it. You could be done for good. And I think that's a really important thing in terms of, again, going back to that whole. This is the teacher in me coming out. They're going back to this whole. At the end of the day, you've got to be responsible for you as a person. If you want to make it and you want to be in the NFL, you're gonna have to behave yourself and work hard.
No NFL team's going to go and draft you if they look at you and go, you're at college for 4 years. You're at 4 different colleges, and why did you move around so much? Oh, you got suspended. That sort of trouble follows you around and whatever else. That's never a good character trait, is it?
Looking back to the NFL draft, one thing you hear a lot, and this is why players slide a lot, character concerns.
Jalen Carter last year.
Day 4 is full of day oneers with character concerns.
Yeah.
In many cases, these are things that are huge. And while we talk about that, I'm conscious of time, gentlemen.
We have gone on 2 hours nearly, haven't we?
I am conscious of time. So I think we're going to have to wrap it up. And I will leave this segment by saying that a video, I don't know if any of you both saw the video recently of Coach Deion Sanders, Coach Prime, going in on some of those Colorado players because he received an email from a teacher at Colorado saying that some of those players were not taking their academics seriously and they were not performing to the
Press
standards
conference
that
he did
Colorado.
last year, wasn't it, or something?
And but not even that, it was in a team meeting. He got up at the front and he blasted everyone. Not everyone in that room was to blame. Not everyone in that room was having that same issue, but he blasted everyone. I don't, from what I remember, think he gave the whole X% of people are going to make it, but he came out and he had a go at them and just said, if you're going to be here, you're going to be here seriously and you are going to take your education seriously. You are, he gave the whole kind of, you are men and you are going to be great men and you are going to be leaders, and part of being great men is being respectful and taking this sort of stuff seriously. That's Coach Prime doing that.
Yeah.
Coach Prime is Mr. Flash. He is
Mr. Flash.
Mr.
Mr. out there, Mr. Live off your wits and everything else, isn't he? But yeah, and I remember, saying that, just I know we're time and murderers, but I remember seeing a press conference of his last year, mid-season, where people were asking, well, why is one of your star players not playing or whatever else? He was just like, effort. Simply, he just said effort, and everyone was like, well, what do you mean? It's like effort. Every day he's got to turn up. Every practice, effort. Can't just walk in and expect things. Effort in class, effort on practice, effort at games, effort. And it was pretty obvious, he was doing the whole kick the guy up the backside to give him a bit of a kick, and it worked because I think Sanders came on again and picked back up again, but it's that kind of thing that you've got to put it in. You've got to put the effort in at class. You've got to put the effort in all the way through, because this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for these guys.
Yeah.
But it's great, as you say, Sam, that the transfer portal is putting that checks and measures in to remind them of accountability, to remind them, yes, you.
And I like that. I like that they've, and like we say, that does counteract that whole
money grabs,
branching out of nil and money grabbing and running away from your problems sort of thing. So I suppose it's a good place to finish. If there's any potential future NFL American or English or wherever you're from thinking of going into college, do your bloody work.
Work hard, do your effort. That's all it works. It'll go far. You'll go far.
So on that note, gentlemen, thank you so very much for today. I am truly honoured to be able to sit with you on Friday evenings, and I do mean that. I know that you are both smirking as I say that. I truly mean it. It is absolutely.
I'm surprised. What's got me about this is we started Sam going, I'm exhausted. I'm so tired after this morning, getting up at 5 and staying awake at 5:30 and whatever else. This has flown by, and I actually feel more invigorated now after sitting and chatting with you guys for the last however long it's been. I'm still not going to stay up for the draft.
But I'd like to think that we got a message last week in one of the group chats that said it was perfect for someone like them listening to our first episode, and I really do hope that if you are listening to this and this is one of the first forays into college football that you are trying to make, that this does help in some sort of way. If we make mistakes along the way, I'm sure you will, because that's what the internet likes to do, but tell us nicely. Please do let us know. But also, if you enjoy this, if this helps, and if there is anything that you feel like we could help discuss or want to talk about as we go through this off season and navigate towards the season, do not be afraid to get at us on our socials. All the links will be in the description of this episode, whether it's on YouTube or whether it is on your podcast platform of choice. And the links to go and follow all of us will also be in there as well, and also to check out the AAW network, where we will be doing a much deeper review into the NFL draft for the actual whole time of the episode and not talking about kind of this sort of stuff. So it'll be very fun to go and watch, and I'm sure we're going to have some very interesting reactions given some of the picks that were made. Monday will either provide, giving the people the time over the weekend to think about it, might make it worse.
And
So,
recover, yeah.
And recover. So that's, yeah, please keep in touch with us over the AEW network. Follow us on socials and let us know what you want us to be covering in the future. But for now, lads, go and enjoy your sleep, and I will go and enjoy round 2 and 3 of the draft.
Take it easy, boys. Thanks very
Yeah.
much. Have a great weekend.
See you later.